Where is God? Have you ever felt the presence of God? He blows me away that since the dawn of time, God has wanted to be with us, to be amongst us. In Exodus 29 verse 42 it says, "For the generations to come, this burnt offering is to be made regularly at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. There I will meet you and speak to you. There I will also meet with the Israelites, and the place will be consecrated by my glory. So I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar, and will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God." Mark 16:15. "And he said to them, Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation."
I don't know about you, but I want more of God. Like, I want more. And I think the older I get and the more I sort of trot upon this earth that's filled with so much despair and hatred and anger and ugly and darkness, I just go, man, God, I want you. I don't want less. I want more. Anybody else feel that way? Like, I just feel like I don't want slick gimmicks. I don't want to play games at church. Like, this is battle. It is warfare. And it's very real. And there's carnage happening all around us. People are stepping on landmines and being sniped by the enemy. And it's a war. And sort of like a young child longing to have time with their dad, that's how I feel today. Like, I want to go fishing with God. I want to spend time playing catch. I want to sit in the boat and have long discussions. I just can't seem to get enough right now. I want more, not less, of God. But I don't want a fake imitation. I want the real deal. And so I don't know if you know this, but from the dawn of time, throughout the whole Old Testament, in pockets of time, God would show himself to his kids, to humanity. He would actually show up and show off. He would do miraculous signs and wonders, but he'd also just spend time with his children. He'd be the creator God who would manifest himself in a very real way, and we would actually get to spend time with God. And so we see this throughout the entire Old Testament. We've been talking about that during this series. And today I'm going to sort of rapid fire a lot of teaching through the entire Old Testament. We're going to finish today in the book of Malachi. So, three sermons. I covered the entire Old Testament. Thank you. So today we're talking about the voice of God and how he delights in his children. He created the world so he could be with us. And so here's a statement that we've said a lot throughout this series. If you've missed a couple of the sermons, I encourage you to go back because they kind of all build on each other up to next week, and I'm fired up about next week. So this is the statement that God made over and over and over. He would say this. Will you guys say it after me? Say, "I will be your God, and you will be my people." That statement is said 28 times throughout the entire Old Testament, and it's from Genesis to Revelations, and it communicates how much our God loves us and how he has a plan for us. He delights in us, and he wants to be with us. And I'm fixing to make a big statement that some of you are not going to agree with. You're going to disagree with this statement. But here's the statement. God is involved in our day-to-day lives. And some of you might be like, okay. And some of you, if you're honest, just completely disagree. And some of you like, I really believe in a God. I know that he created all this, but I'm not sure he's actually, I don't really talk to him. I don't pray. Why would I do that? Because he's not going to in my life, he's never really engaged in my day-to-day life. So why would I actually say that I believe that? So it kind of flies in the face of the teaching of a deist, if you know what a deist is. A deist says that God created the world, and it's kind of like a clockmaker. He got it spinning, but then he just kind of completely hands off. He's not really involved in it anymore. He made it. There is a God, but I'm not really involved in the day-to-day. I don't really care about how you guys are. That's what a deist would say. But I would submit to today that many of you are what I call a practical atheist. You will say, yeah, I believe in God, but I don't think He's involved in my life. And so it's sort of like practical. I go to church because, I don't know, it's good networking. I'm trying to find a chick. Or it's a good place to find a girl or a boy, by the way. That's better than a bar, right? Maybe it's because you want your kids to turn out all right. If we're honest, like behavior modification. That's a reasonable reason to go to church. But I'm going to submit to you today that you're missing out on the best part. And that's the part where the Holy Spirit actually is alive in you. And you get to engage with a living God that's a part of you and with you. And so today specifically, I want to talk about the fact that these Old Testament stories that we hear about aren't just stories. They're not fictional. They're actual historical accounts. And we get to hear a historical document of these amazing things that happened in the people of Israel and this holy nation, that God's chosen people of who He chose to bless the whole land with. And so today I'm going to specifically talk about, we're going to go back a little bit, and then we're going to come forward really fast. So we're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant and the temple. Okay, so I'm going to declare something that I want to just start by saying the sermon. This is the statement I'd like to say to you. God is all up in your business. So touch your neighbor and say to him, just real loud and strong, say, God knows your business. Say that. Say it with passion. God knows your business. So we're in a series that is called The Church Has Left the Building. And we've been talking about how God created the world so He could dwell with us. The manifest presence of the Lord is what I long for. And so this masterful, intelligent designer who made all of this actually wants to chill with us. He wants to hang with us. He wants to spend time with you and I. It started back in the Garden of Eden. He was with his kids in Egypt. And then He was with them for 40 years in the desert with Moses, actually 80 years. And they would experience Him at the tent of meeting. And this tent of meeting was like a temporary tent of testimony. And it was called the testimony because that's where His 10 commandments were. And so we had the testimony of God. And they would actually see God's manifest glory come down in a cloud by day, fire by night. They would see this Shekinah glory cloud where God would actually talk, literally talk with Moses. He would chat. They'd have chit-chats together. And the Bible teaches us that Moses was asked to build this chest. And the chest was made of acacia wood. It was 4 foot wide and 2 foot tall. And it was wrapped in pure gold. And on top of it were these 2 beautiful cherubim. And in the middle of that was the mercy seat. And that mercy seat was where God's presence was. And Moses would come and talk to this chest that was sitting inside of the tent of the meeting. And that chest was called the Ark of the Covenant. And some call it the Ark of the Testimony. And inside of that chest, the Ark of the Covenant, that everybody has even made movies about, right? You guys have seen Temple of Doom, right? So in the side of this Ark of the Covenant was 3 things. The 10 Commandments. There was Aaron's rod or his staff. And then there was also this bowl that they had put manna from the days of old in the Old Testament when God would send down manna in the morning, every single morning, right? So they were all in there to remind the people of Israel of God's faithfulness through the past. And there's many times that the ark would usher in God's power and presence. And so, in fact, Moses' predecessor, his name was Joshua, he finally got to actually lead the Israelites out of the desert into their land that they were going to inhabit, right? This land that had been talked about, the land flowing with milk and honey that God had promised to them. And so he actually gets to do this, and when he does it, they take the Ark of the Covenant, and the Levites, who are the priests, start walking into the Jordan River that was at flood stage. And as they start to walk into this river, as soon as their feet touches the water, the water parts, just like the Red Sea. It stops. And that was miraculous because it was at flood stage. Somehow he stops the river and it parts in half, and they take the Ark of the Covenant across the river. That's amazing. So the moment that they touched it, they did. Another thing that happened was that Joshua took this Ark of the Covenant into battle with him. And one of those battles was called the Battle of Jericho. Jericho was a massive, big fortified city, and God came to Joshua and said, here's my plan. Here's what I want you to do. I need you to not bring any swords, okay? Put your swords down. That's my idea. And Joshua's like, okay, hold on. You want me to fight a battle against that city and those men that are mighty warriors with no sword? He's like, yes. He's like, okay, so what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to take your little trumpet, do, and you're going to blow your trumpet, and you're going to walk around the city. He's like, okay, let me hear it again. I'm just going to say it back to you because I'm not sure I understood. You want me to fight that city with little do, and you want me to walk around the city with the Ark of the Covenant? Yes, that's correct. And so my man Joshua, he's like, okay, I'm going to do it. And he walks around the city 7 times. He blows the trumpet, boop, boop, and the walls come tumbling down, right? So he wins the battle. And so this Ark of the Covenant oftentimes would lead the people of Israel, and it represented God's presence and his glory. And so I just want to say that finally when they get into the land, you can imagine, they've been wandering nomads, shepherds for 80 years. And they finally get into the land. God's chosen people finally has their own land, and they start to be established, and they build homes, and then they wanted the 12 tribes to all have their own place, and so they all get established, and they start to build, and then they finally like, you know what? We also want to have a king, and we want a temple, because we want to be like the surrounding nations, right? Can I say something to you real fast? I'm going to preach a little bit. Growth and change is never easy, and it's usually painful. Why do you say amen? That's not good news. Growth and change is never easy, and it's usually painful. But staying stuck where you don't belong, that's the kind of pain that you don't want to face. And some of you came in here today, and you're heavy, and you're carrying something. It's on you, and you're stuck. What is it? Where are you stuck? Is it greed? Is it that you carelessly spend God's resources that he gave you on things that you're not supposed to be buying? Are you hoarding when you should be more generous? Or maybe it's unforgiveness. Maybe you're harboring bitterness, and that bitterness is actually poisoning you, and you're becoming angry. Maybe for you, that's leading to jealousy and it's leading to bitterness. Or maybe you're stuck in a lie. And you've been believing this lie and saying the lie over and over and over, and it's actually starting to manifest itself. Or maybe it's not any of that, and maybe it's actually an addiction. Maybe something's got a hold of you and it's gripping you and killing you. It could be that your fear to grow and to change is creating pain that you're choosing not to face. And because you're not facing that pain and the growth that God's calling you to, you're stuck. The Israelites, they had to feel that way, man. 80 years. We're stuck here. They've been in the desert wandering. Can you imagine allowing years to pass and seeing your kids grow up and die, right? Your life is just on hold and you're pushing pause, not having any purpose, and certainly saying to God, what is the point? Why is this taking so long? I don't want to be in a tent anymore. I'm tired of camping and I hate the mosquitoes. Right? Can you imagine? Over 1 million people on an 80-year camp out? My kids can't handle it for the weekend. Like, Dad, I don't want hot dogs, and I'm getting stung by everything, and I don't like the bugs. I'm like, I will be your dad, and you will be my children. And you will enjoy this camp out. We're going to have fun, you understand? She's like, no, Dad. They actually love camping out. Anyways, I'm so dumb. So they're finally like going, man, why, how long is this going to take? God, will you establish us in the land? And you know what? Will you give us a king? And I want a great, big, beautiful building that we call our temple. God always had a better plan. He was always loving his children. He always wanted his children and this holy nation to thrive in the land. But his kids, they were impatient. I mean, you can imagine. I would have been. This story unfolded for 500 years. Since Abraham sent him, they were then sent to Egypt, 400 years. Now 80 more years in the desert. So they're kind of like, hey, can you kind of speed this story up? It's been 500 years. So after 400 years, God sends them a prophet. And that prophet's name is a spokesperson for God, by the way, if you don't know what prophet means. His name was Eli. And he had two boys named Hophni and Phinehas. And they did evil in the eyes of God. In fact, they stole from the offerings of the house of God. And they also were womanizers. And they were scandalous weasels. So these guys did evil in the eyes of God. And they actually went to war against the Philistines. And those two jokers, they brought the Ark of God with them and treated it like it was a rabbit's foot. Like, yeah, we're going to win because we're bringing the Ark of the Covenant. And you won't believe what happens. 30,000 men were killed, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines. So they couldn't believe it. It was stolen. It was taken into plunder. And when the news arrived to their dad, Eli, man, he was so mad. Eli at the time, he was really overweight. He was a chunky monkey, and he was blind. That's just the Bible. I'm just telling you the truth. In fact, I'm going to read it to you. It says, the one who brought the news replied, Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army has suffered heavy losses. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And the ark of God has been captured. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken, and he died. For he was an old man, and he was heavy. I told you. He had led Israel for 40 years. So here Eli dies when he finds out the news that the Ark of the Covenant and his two kids are dead. And that's the end of his story. You talk about being stuck. He knew his two kids were supposed to take over, and God wasn't going to have it because they were doing evil in the eyes of God. And so the Israelites, man, they're like, what are we going to do now? Like, we're done. The ark is gone, all is lost. And they felt like God's power and presence were no longer with them, and they had no idea what to do. But God wasn't done with their story. And in fact, the next part of this, in the very next chapter, is one of my all-time favorite stories in the Bible. Here's what it says. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. Everybody say Dagon. Dagon was sort of this half man, half fish god. Lowercase g, by the way. He was an idol that everybody worshipped, right? And so for the Philistines, this was their powerful god. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and put him back in his place, which I think would be discouraging if it's your God. Like, I'm going to put you back, buddy. But the following morning when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And then read this. His head and hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold, and only his body remained. You know, if I'm a Philistine and that's my God, and he falls down twice and his head is broken and his arms are falling off, that's going to be hard for my faith. I'm going to be challenged a little bit and going, I'm not sure I believe in this guy anymore. So I recently went road biking. And while I was biking, there were these two groundhogs, and they were standing on top of a hill together. This is the funniest thing. Like, I look over, and these two groundhogs are standing there, and one of the groundhogs just reaches over and pushes the other one down. And he tumbles down, gets on the ground, and then he looks up like, do that. And I about fell off my bike. I was laughing so hard. And that's kind of what I see God doing. He's like, you're going to put me in the temple with Dagon, really? He's like, okay. Boop. So they're like, oh, we got to put him back. And he's like, bloop, does it again the next day. It's such a great story. God has such a fantastic sense of humor. And so after that, it actually gets worse, though. So they pick Dagon back up, and they're like, what is happening? Because they woke off. God was mad that the ark had been confiscated by the Philistines. And so you won't believe what he does to the Philistines. He afflicted the entire city, young and old, with some kind of a tumor or a boil or something. And it was in a very unfortunate place on their bodies. I'll let you figure that out. So when the Philistines finally realized that it was because of the God of Israel and because of the Ark of the Covenant, like, hey, this is because of that box. Let's get the box out of there. Like, hey, Israel, we'd like you to come and get this thing immediately because we have boils and we don't like them. And so the ark is finally returned, and God places another prophet, Eli's predecessor. His name is Samuel. And last week we talked about the fact that during Samuel's reign, the people of Israel made their case that man, we want a king. And so God felt rejected by that. He couldn't believe that his kids didn't think he was enough. And like, you want to put a dude over me. So they choose some strapping, young, tall, dark, handsome Gaston guy named Saul. And he does evil in the eyes of God. He's the very first Hebrew king of Israel. And he had a demon possession. He would throw spears at David. I mean, he was jacked up in the head. He had all kinds of problems, filled with pride, always trying to stay on top. And it was not good. But the Israelites were like, you know what? I don't care. We want a king. And God told them that was what would happen. And so they wanted to be like the surrounding nations, right? Then it's all they knew. And Pharaoh was their, that's all they'd seen their whole life. They're like, hey, we've seen mighty and powerful, and we want the same thing. We want a king. We want great big buildings. And so here's what I have to say to us today. What we love determines what we seek. Think about that. What we really love, it determines what we go after, what we seek after. And I'm just going to unpackage that a little bit. If you really want it, you're going to get it. If you want it, you're going to have it. And that doesn't matter what it is. If it's the Snickers or if it's the Cadillac, we're going to do what we can to make it happen. And that goes all the way to even choosing to have the affair. God, though, He's always been after our heart. Since the dawn of time, He created us so we would love Him. But He allows us to choose that. And I don't get that. I seriously don't understand. If I was God, I've said this before, and I made all y'all jokers, you would dig me. You'd be all about me. You'd be like hardwired into every one of you that you'd be like, man, I love Blake. You would just I love the Creator that made you. But God didn't do that. This is the most beautiful part of God's story, is that He actually made us to choose to love Him. I don't understand that. God allows us to choose Him in our own time, in our own way. We can rebel against Him and run from Him, but eventually God is after every one of our heart. He wants to draw all men to Himself. And so, a lot of us, we want to love Him, but we're not seeking after Him. Practical atheists. We want to say, I want you and I want more of you, but we're not actually pursuing. And so that's sort of, God cares about what you're seeking. It matters to Him what you're seeking. So let me say this again. What you love greatly influences what you're seeking. So if you struggle to fit in with other people and you're seeking to fit in and you want to have friends, you want to get attention, then we naturally seek the affection which can cause us to act like the people around us, right? When you choose friends that are far from God and walking in darkness, you actually will become like them, right? And so God cares about the surrounding nations, and He doesn't want us to become like the world. And as a father of all girls, I get that. I struggle sometimes with the friends that my kids are choosing. And I pay attention to the friends that they are bringing around. It's because I am called by God to fight for them to stay holy, right? And to choose to help them become like Christ. That's my job. And so I don't want an inch of darkness to come into my house. And so I'm like, watching and thinking about what they're saying, how they're talking with their friends, because it matters. My precious bride, she's homeschooled, all 4 of our girls. And so we're on the last leg of that and have 2 years left with our very last daughter. But my girls, because they have sort of been under our care, they're kind of innocent. And they're fragile. And they haven't been exposed a whole lot to the darkness that's in this world. And especially my daughter, Montana. She is like so full of life, so full of joy. And she kind of like Tigger bounces through life, right? She's like, hee hee. Like, this is her, right? She's like, her motto in life is kind of, I'm here, your life just got better. Like, she's just like that, right? She's so full of joy. But she can easily be wooed because of that. And it kind of scares me. We talked about, I asked for permission to share this. And especially when it comes to boys, right? So she's strikingly gorgeous. And you can probably tell by the way that she leads worship and runs after God. She's just so free. She's just like goes for it with all of her heart. It's so pure. She does that in her bedroom alone, and she does it in the seat, and she also does it on stage. So anyway, she's just so full of God's power and presence that's just like she's uninhibited and doesn't seem to have a lot of care or worry about what the world thinks. And so because of that, she just kind of goes after it. So sometimes boys don't know what to do with that. And boys are like, I'm not sure. So this one boy recently was trying to pursue her, and he sent this to her in a text. He said, "You're so sweet that I now have diabetes." And I was like, bro, that's just good. That's a Mac Daddy right there. Like, I had to give it to him for creativity. But right after that, that boy dropped her for her best friend and started dating her. So broke my daughter's heart. So I broke his leg. I'm just kidding. You shouldn't clap. Don't clap for your pastor saying that. That's not good. But anyway, sometimes Tana, because she kind of is all out there, it's perceived as she's trying too hard. And sometimes because of that, she feels overlooked, and she doesn't sometimes feel like she fits. And she sometimes feels like, I don't know, I see her sort of as susceptible and easily influenced. And so we were talking about this recently, and she said to me, "Hey, Dad, can I show you something that I have on the screen of my phone?" And so I was like, "Yeah." And so she read this statement to me. It said, "I don't chase people anymore. I've learned that I'm here and I'm important. I'm not going to run after people to prove that I matter." And wow. Yeah. So as a dad, it kind of broke my heart that she, was hurting to find her worth and hurting to think that she doesn't matter because of mean people. But I think all of us have probably felt that before, haven't we? Inside, I was kind of crying, wanting to protect my daughters for that, but I recognized that sometimes the growth and the pain are put there by God so that she can actually become who God wants her to become. And so John Piper has a quote that he says all the time that I think you've probably heard before, but I just love it. He says, "God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him." And I think a lot of times we choose to not be glorified in God because we're trying to find satisfaction from man and from things and stuff. And why do we do that? Why do we find our satisfaction in this life from anything other than God? He made us. He adores us. We're His kids. And sometimes what we're seeking is just the wrong stuff. I'll tell you, sometimes for me, in a house of all women, I try to fit in. And it just doesn't work out for me. Like I try to engage, but I'm just not a girl. And I try to have the conversations, but there's so many words, and they're talking over each other, and they all understand everything that all of them are saying, and they're all talking at the same time. I'm like, I need coffee. And so sometimes I just give in. And I'll just sit down and watch the TV shows with them. And I'm just going to admit this. I try to be a man, but I'm going to be real honest. I kind of like the TV shows. And sometimes they play music, and I try to act like I don't like it, but I secretly kind of dig Taylor Swift. And so I have a video of me being persuaded to become like them, and I want to share that video with you. Here's us in the car.
Start on the chores and sweep till the floor's all clean. I play guitar and cooking basically. This life, no matter what I do. It's on the playground, won't make you many friends. Should keep in mind there is nothing I do better than revenge. So then you talk real slow, 'cause it's late and your mama don't know. Our song is the way you laugh at home. For I've said amen, asking God if He. Wow. Even I'm the one who understands you. Been here all.
You can take me down with just one single word.
They hard to tell.
You don't know. You don't know you're beautiful. So, I'm telling you, I'm a foreigner in a foreign land. And I'm trying my hardest to fit in, but it just doesn't. Anyways, I secretly love it. And I love being around all my girls, and we have a blast in my home. And I don't encourage that kind of behavior driving, by the way. But that's exactly what the Israelites were facing. They were becoming like the surrounding nations, and they were fitting in where they shouldn't fit in. They wanted to be like everybody else, and they wanted to look like the Joneses, right? They wanted to have the same stuff and be like them. So God is looking down going, why do you need more? Why do you need a king? And why do you have to have a big, beautiful building? And they took things into their own hands, and they were like, you know what? We're going to make this happen. I kind of get that. Sometimes I kind of could be a knucklehead like that. And when things aren't going my way, I just like, you know what then? I'm going to make it happen. I'm just going to make it rain. And I'll just make the thing, whatever it is. Have you ever done that? Like you just knock down doors when you weren't supposed to? God's will or not, man, I'm making this happen. We have a tendency to fight for control of our story so it turns out the way that we want, forgetting to seek the heart of our God and trusting in Him. We're not patient. And people either have a heart that trusts God or a heart that tries to control God. We talked about that a little bit last week. I would just ask you, which one are you? Are you the kind of person that tries to change God's heart, or are you seeking to have Him change your heart? Essentially, we tell God, listen, man, you're not the author of my story. I can take the pen and I'll write my own story because you're not doing that good of a job. And it's because I want to be the king and I want to have a castle. I'm going to be the king of my beautiful castle. Which really comes down to what we love, doesn't it? And we've continually proven throughout history that we love ourselves way more than we love God. And we seek our own interests way more than the interest of what God wants. We continually demand to have the very own king and my own building, and eventually God gives that to them. And you guys know that David comes along after Saul, and he's their next king, and he was called a man after God's own heart. And he did have a beautiful heart. He said things like, as the deer pants for water, so my soul longs for you. He said things like, God, create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence and restore unto me the joy of your salvation. He said things about how he longed for God. The Psalms are all filled with that. He wanted more and more and more of God. But God didn't want him to build the temple because he was also a man of war. He had slayed thousands. And because of that, he had too much blood on his hand, and he didn't want him to build the temple. And so he asked that his son Solomon build the temple. But there's this amazing account when David actually got to bring the Ark of the Covenant into their temporary temple that they had, that David built. And when they brought that Ark of the Covenant in, David got naked. It says in the Bible he got undignified before the Lord. And he was dancing and he was handing out bread and pomegranates. He was giving away grapes, buck naked. And he was doing that because God's presence was finally coming into Israel. And they were finally going to have God's manifest presence. And it happened. David saw God's Shekinah glory come down on the house. And sure enough, they felt established. God was with them. God's manifest glory dwelt amongst them again. And it's this temple, when Solomon finally built it, it was elaborate. It's an amazing account of how all the surrounding nations brought all the finest gold and the finest timber, and they built one of the best pieces of temple it's in history. And this temple had an outer courts and it had an inner courts, and inside of that, God told them how to decorate the furniture. And then inside of the inner courts was what was called the Holy of Holies. And once a year, a priest would go in there and pray on behalf of the people for an atoning sacrifice where they would kill an unblemished lamb. That's foreshadowing for next week, by the way. And they would celebrate every single year that a priest would go into God's presence, and they would actually tie a rope on his ankle in case he died in the presence of God, so they could pull him out because they wouldn't go in. So this place inside the Holy of Holies was where God sat in the mercy seat in between the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant. That's where God was. And they had all these rituals and ceremonial things that they had to do in order to live up to God's expectation, because they were trying to live up to the Old Testament law. And there was over 600 laws. And the people didn't feel like they could. And so that was in 946 BC, once the temple was finally built. By the way, that was 1,000 years after Abraham was born. And for the rest of the next 1,000 years after that, almost 1,000, 946 to be exact, there was prophet after prophet that came, and God kept sending people to try and keep the chosen people of God, this holy nation, on track. But king after king would do evil in the eyes of God, and the people of Israel would turn away from God. Over and over and over, they would turn to God, and then they'd turn away from God. And this went on for 1,000 years. And so they had guys like Elijah and Elisha, men like Zechariah and Isaiah, who told the Israelites, listen, you're not living for God. God's after your heart. Hey, Israel, God's after your heart. In fact, what Isaiah said is, you draw near to me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me, Israel. And if you don't know the story of Hosea, he was trying to do the same exact story, telling them that they were like Gomer, who was a prostitute, and continued to cheat on God. So throughout the whole history of Israel, God kept trying to say, why won't you follow me? I will be your God and you'll be my people if you'll simply be obedient and follow after me. But they chose sin, they chose idolatry, and they were placing other things before God over and over and over and over. And it's because our human nature easily forgets about the miraculous that God's done in our past. We easily kind of place aside what God's done, and we just kind of do things our own way. And so I'm going to ask you again, Heritage, what are you seeking? What is it that you love? Because God cares about what you're seeking after, and He cares about what you love. God knows your business. It's not like you're hiding anything from Him. He's the God of light, and He reveals truth in each of us. You know what's crazy to me? Is He knows it all. He knows your hidden thoughts. He knows all that you've done. And He still wants it all. Whew. He wants every bit of it, even the hot mess that each of us are. He still wants to step in and say, I can make it well. I can heal it. I can take what's broken and make it beautiful. And so I just need you to hear me today. You are worthy of God's love no matter what anybody else thinks, no matter what anybody else says, no matter what you think, and no matter what you say about yourself. God says that you matter, and He loves you, and He adores you, and He wants to draw you to Himself. That's what God wants today for all of us. This life, man, it's a constant struggle to find our way. We're kind of on this path that I'm not sure how I got here, and we're all imperfect, and we're flawed, and we're messy. But we should never forget that our God adores us, and He has a plan for us, and He's sending us down a path to give glory to Him. So we are worthy to be loved because we belong to an almighty God.